Hey everybody, welcome back to Journey to VR. So this week is going to be part one of a two-part demo of how we can retarget animation data onto characters. This week we're going to be starting off by showing how we can use that retargeting tool to work with an HIK rig. So pretty straightforward stuff. This is going to be sort of a retargeting 101 demo. The next demo, or part two of this, is going to be how we can use that in a slightly more advanced example and retarget animation data onto a custom control rig. And I'll be sharing with you some tips and tricks that I've developed over the years of working with this retargeter to make sure that data gets onto the character correctly. So let's hop into Maya and check out the basics in sort of our part one demo of how to use that retargeter with HIK. So when you're using the retargeting tool, the first thing you need to do is make sure that your character's definition has been set up. Now this rig is actually the rig that was developed by the quick rig tool that we went over in the previous demo. So this skeleton definition was already filled out for us automatically by that quick rig tool. But this is really key to the way the retargeter works. Basically what you do is you go through and you specify which joints line up with these little icons. So it's pretty basic stuff. Where are the hips? Where is the head? Which joint's the elbow, which joint's the hand. So these 12 basic joints need to be defined. If there's extra joints, like down the spine or something like that, the retargeter will use them, but they're not necessary. So every time you're working with a character with the retargeter, the first step is defining a skeleton. Once that skeleton's been defined, you basically take a snapshot of the character in a T-pose, and that creates an offset map. So it no longer looks at the local rotational values of those joints, and that's really the magic of how everything gets zeroed out. So that's step one. This character also has on top of it right now a source that's being driven by a control rig. So that control rig is, in this example, an HIK rig. So basically what's happening is that HIK rig is dragging around the skeleton that's bound to the geometry. And because it's an HIK rig, we can position this character using both forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. So if I grab an end marker and translate it, we're going to use FK. And if I grab it like something like the shoulder and go into my rotate tool, we can use, I'm sorry, I should have said IK. We can use FK to position this character's arm. So at any given time, you can pose your character using FK or IK. The other thing that's really pretty cool about the HIK solver is it has the ability to transfer that energy just past that body part. If I overextend that arm, you can see that the character moves in a nice, realistic way. It transfers that energy down the shoulder, into the spine. He squats down at the hips. And this full body inverse kinematic solver is actually key to what the retargeter uses for the math for solving traditional retargeting issues. Like if your character has shorter limbs and you need to make sure that hand actually goes out and touches something, well, you need a system that can transfer or maybe tug that arm all the way through the shoulder. So that FBIK solver, or that human IK solver, really is the magic of how the retargeter works. And you'll see that a bit more in context as we move through this demo. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to get some animation data in our scene to begin retargeting onto this little dude. And you could use the content browser to load up some animation data, or if you want to quickly grab an animation take to begin working with, just go up to your character source, click on None to get back to the Create window, and just tell it to import in an animation example. So as soon as you do that, Maya goes through and it loads up another character that's going to be this fighting character. And you can see here that we now have two characters in our scene. We have the dummy fight and the quick rig worker. If we jump over to the dummy fight, you can see that it also has its skeleton definition filled out. And as I click through these little icons here, you can see that those basic bones or joints have been defined. So that's pretty straightforward. So what we want to do is we want to take this animation that's on this guy, and you'll notice that it's actually, my time slider here is set to something incorrectly. It's set to 24 frames per second, and this mocap data is obviously not on frames here, so we want to get that put back to 30. So we'll just click down here and switch that. And actually, this is pretty cool. You'll notice in 2018 that we've improved the tick accuracy of the time slider, so we can now do things that are much higher precision than we used to be able to do. Things like 29.97 drop frame. That's all been added in 2018. So we're just going to go to 30 frames per second, and we'll just put our start to 1 and 1 just to kind of tidy stuff up here, and we'll put this out to something like 140 to kind of extend this through. So this little mocap example that loads up by default is actually a pretty good one because it goes to a relatively decent range of motion, and it also does a full 180 degree twist or 360 degree twist on that torso, so you can really get a sense of how that retargeter, is it working correctly, or do you have things set up properly? You'll notice that right away because of that twist if it's not done properly. So it's actually a great example to work with. So the first thing we want to do is we just want to scale our little guy up here. just to get him a little bit larger, so he kind of matches the overall shape of our other karate mocap dummy. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back to our quick rig worker, and instead of having this control rig, be the source that's dragging the skinned character around, what we want to do is we want to switch its source over to dummy fight. And as soon as we do that, you can see now that our character, if we just kind of slide it over here, looks a good bit like the dummy fight character here. And what the retargeter does by default, and regardless of scale or size of this, it just works. Like if I scale this guy up or make him big or small, you can see that he basically compensates, and he still does the move correctly. And what he's doing by default is he's trying to match joint angle. So if you look at all of these skeletons here, they're essentially being driven to match joint angle. Pretty straightforward. But like I said before, sometimes you might want to have, instead of joint angle being, what you're more biased toward, you want the actual world position of where his foot is or where his hand is to be the driving factor of that retargeting solve. So how do you do that? Well, you basically jump into your character definition and you modify a couple things. So if we jump onto this guy and say edit, actually go back to our definition here and just say edit properties. So if we edit our HIK properties for this guy, if we go to the retargeter specific and we turn on match, watch what happens. As soon as I turn on match source, notice that his feet are now matching the world position and his legs are no longer, and we can kind of scale this guy up if we wanted to get him a little bit more similar here. His legs are no longer matching joint angle, right? So it's a bit more biased now toward matching world position. And that's because on these character controls here, you'll notice that if we click on one of these little icons, the translate for that IK handle has been turned on. So if I drop this down, you'll notice that that leg now is matching FK. If I rise that value up, it starts to match the IK solver. So for any of these end kind of markers or positions in the retargeting control system, you can specify, whether or not it wants to match IK or FK, which is really, really pretty awesome. Now, the other thing that you can do with this, it's really pretty cool. Let's say we grab this hand right over here and we start to rise that hand up, telling it to match translation. You can see that by default, it's trying to get to that new in position, but it stops at the body part. So this is really where the magic of the human IK solver comes into play. If we put that hand up to match 100% of the translation and we start to give it more pull, it starts to allow it to transfer that energy through the human IK solver all the way up. So it actually starts to be able to go past that body part and use that FBIK solver, that full body inverse kinematic solver, to try to make that hand match that world position. So that pull value, again, you can animate all of these guys on and off at any given time. So it's really a very, very powerful, super, super cool retargeter, because you can do things like, say I really need those hands to hit my guy in that face. And then by kind of dialing those guys in there, you can see what we've got is we've now got that character doing the karate move, and his arm, this arm over here, is trying to match joint angle. His feet obviously aren't matching joint angle, but his hand is kind of going out there and matching that world position. So if we just kind of hide this guy, you can see, we'll kind of tone this down a little bit just because it looks a little bit more realistic. But that is the basics of how that retargeter works. Very, very powerful, super, super cool, and amazingly flexible, because you can at any given time, again, dial in whether you're trying to match forward kinematics or inverse kinematics. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So next week, I'm going to be going into how we can do this same type of workflow, but again, instead of mapping onto an HIK rig, we're going to be mapping onto a custom defined rig, a rig that was set up by a TD. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hey, so if you're taking the time to watch this video on Vimeo or on YouTube, make sure you go back to the area to the Journey to VR blog. On that blog, I've been recording many, many demos showing Maya and Max, as well as game engines, doing VR and AR workflows. We also have a large collection of written articles with interviews from our customers and VR and AR thought leaders about what they think is super cool. So make sure you go check all that data out. Thanks again for taking the time to check this out, everybody. Cheers.